You wake up on a bed that isn't really a bed. It's straw flattened, scratchy, and filled with more mystery bugs than you'd like to imagine. You stretch, and one stalk pokes your arm like it's reminding you, hey, you're living in the Middle Ages now. There's no mattress, no memory foam, no weighted blanket, just the delightful crunch of dried grass under your back, and maybe the faint smell of cow that once chewed it. Lucky you. You blink, open your eyes, and the dim light sneaks in through a wooden shutter that doesn't quite close properly. Sunlight spills into your one-room hut. No curtains, no blinds, just a gap that doubles as both your window and the village gossip network, because let's face it, soundproofing hasn't been invented yet. You roll over and spot your clothes, or rather the single piece of clothing you own. A coarse wool tunic, brownish gray, with a texture so rough it could double as sandpaper. But here's the kicker. You can't just decide to upgrade your wardrobe. That would be illegal. You think about that first scrap you picked up at the market last week, the one you dreamed about sewing into your tunic to look slightly less like a mud-covered scarecrow. Spoiler alert, congratulations, you've just broken medieval law. Back then, fashion wasn't just about taste, it was regulated, micromanaged, and policed harder than your social media feed today. And here's where the joke comes in. You probably won't survive this. Not because the straw bed will actually kill you, but because trying to dress even slightly better than your station could get you fined, shamed, or jailed. Imagine explaining to your cellmate that you're locked up for looking too fabulous. Yeah, not exactly the rebel story you wanted. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's awake in the middle of the night listening. 2 weird history stories. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle to your feet, scratchy tunic in hand. Embrace yourself for the bizarre fashion rules that medieval society is about to slam down on your poor, sleep-deprived self. You slip that rough wool tunic over your head, and instantly, it's like wearing a sack that's actively trying to insult you. It itches, it scratches, and yet it's the only thing you're allowed to wear. Why? Because in the Middle Ages, fashion wasn't personal. It was political. Your outfit wasn't just clothes. It was a billboard that screamed your place in society. They called them sumptuary laws. Fancy term, simple meaning. Don't you dare look richer than you are. If you're a peasant, your life is already a never-ending mud spot treatment. The lords wanted to make sure you stayed looking the part. So, if you ever dared to wear silk or velvet or even a splash of forbidden purple, congratulations, you were now a criminal. Forget tax fraud or theft. The ultimate rebellion was trying to look fabulous. Picture this, a dirt farmer, like you, strutting into the village with a silk scarf. Bold move. Within an hour, the local officials would be all over you like you'd just robbed the king's treasury. You'd get fined, humiliated, or maybe tossed into a dungeon, where rats would critique your fashion choices while chewing through your shoes. And oh, the nobles had fun with the details. Purple, reserved for royalty. Fur trim, like ermine. Off limits unless your family tree had more branches than the actual forest. Even shoes came with rules. Rich folks wore poulain, those ridiculous pointy shoes, so long you had to tie the tips to your knees, just to walk without tripping. You're stuck with boots shaped like gas-pactual feet, functional, boring, and as stylish as a potato sack. The reasoning was to preserve the dignity of the upper class. In other words, the rich didn't want anyone confusing them with people who shoveled pig manure for a living. Because imagine the horror if a baron got mistaken for a farmer. Unthinkable. And of course, there was the money angle. They wanted peasants to spend on rent and taxes, not waste their hard-earned pennies on looking good. Fashion was theft. Theft of noble dignity. So, when you look down at your scratchy, shapeless tunic, remember, it's not just ugly, it's the law. And the law says you're supposed to look like you've just crawled out of a haystack, because you probably did. The clang of the town bell slices through the evening like a rusty blade, echoing down narrow alleys and across rooftops that lean together like gossiping old neighbors. You freeze by the hearth, the one warm patch in your smoky little hut, because you know exactly what that sound means. Bedtime? Not for kids, well, yes for kids, but also for you. A full-grown adult who's now being treated like a misbehaving toddler. It's the curfew bell. Curfew, from the French couvre-feu. Literally cover your fire. And that's exactly what you're supposed to do. Snuff out the flames, blow out the candles, plunge everything into darkness. The town council wasn't trying to make you more productive tomorrow. They were just trying to make sure you didn't burn the entire place down tonight. After all, your house is basically one big tinderbox straw roof, wooden walls, and enough dry hay lying around to roast half the village if someone sneezes too hard. On paper, it makes sense. One careless candle left flickering could reduce the whole town to ashes. But in practice, it's a disaster for you. You smother the fire, and instantly, your home transforms into a cave. The kind of darkness so thick you could swear it's pressing against your face. You shuffle forward, stub your toe on a bucket, trip over a chicken, and step in something wet that you really hope is just spilled water. Forget reading, though. Let's be honest. You can't. Forget sewing or mending tools. The needle might as well be a dagger waiting to jab straight through your palm. Night work is impossible. Nightlife doesn't exist. You're left lying on your straw mattress, wide awake, staring into the void, while rats scuttle across the rafters and your neighbor snores like a dying cow to thin walls over. Of course, the nobles didn't follow the same rules. Their castles were stone fortresses, less likely to go up in flames, and they had servants whose entire job was to manage their fires. So while you're sitting in pitch-black misery, they're feasting by candlelight, sipping wine, and congratulating themselves on keeping the peasants safe, convenient. And if you thought you could cheat, think again. Town guards patrolled after the bell. If they spotted your fire still glowing, the fine was brutal, sometimes more than a week's wages. That's right, one candle stub could cost you the bread you needed to survive. And, honestly, the guards weren't just looking for flames. Darkness made it easier to keep people indoors. Less chance of drunks stumbling out to stab each other. Fewer thieves lurking in alleys. Fewer secret midnight meets that might lead to trouble. You wake up hungry, stomach gnawing at itself, like it has decided to join the peasant rebellion against you. All night you dreamed of roasted pork, maybe even a slab of beef if the heavens were feeling generous. You shuffle into your one-room kitchen, as you optimistically call it only for reality, to smack you square in the face. It's Friday, which means no meat. Again, welcome to the world of medieval dietary law. Courtesy of the church, half the year, meat was forbidden. Fridays, Lent, Advent, saints, feast days, holy days you couldn't even name altogether. You spent more days chewing fish than actually chewing meat. Forget bacon. Instead, say hello to salted herring, pickled eels, and dried carp that tasted suspiciously like mud. Imagine trudging back from the fields after 12 hours of breaking your back, only to be greeted by a plate of fish glaring at you like it knows you're disappointed. Spiritual message: discipline and sacrifice. Practical message: please don't eat all the cows before winter. Cows weren't just dinner, they were plows, milk machines, leather providers. If everyone slaughtered them at the first grumble of their stomach, medieval agriculture would collapse faster than your appetite at the sight of yet another pickled herring. The church's restrictions, inconvenient as they were, kept food supplies stretched, preserved livestock, and, whether you liked it or not, kept society from falling into famine. Now, the nobles, different story. They had fancy alternatives: massive sturgeons, exotic eels, and fake meats made of almonds sculpted into the shape of roast geese. You got whatever the rivers spit out, and maybe some beans, if you were lucky. To make it worse, fasting days were policed. Smugglers risked flogging to sell contraband meat. If you got caught sneaking a chicken leg on a Holy Friday, expect fines, penance, or standing in church for hours while the entire village stared at you like you just ruined salvation itself. Oddly enough, these dietary laws boosted economies. Fishing towns thrived. Monasteries grew rich selling preserved fish, and cooks, blessed their tired souls, were forced to get creative with vegetables and grains. That part scholars still argue about. Was fasting really about spiritual discipline, or was it just a clever way to manage food resources when survival depended on not being gluttonous. So there you sit, poking at your salted herring with the enthusiasm of a prisoner, scraping the walls of his cell. The fish doesn't care. It knows you're not thrilled. It knows it's not bacon. And in this moment, you realize one of the cruelest truths of the Middle Ages. No law in history has ever managed to make fish taste like bacon, and that's the real tragedy. You wake up to the faint sound of roosters crowing in the distance. Or maybe it's just the clamor of the market opening. Your tiny straw mattress feels harder than you remember. The chill from the stone floor sneaking through the cracks in your hut. Today, like most days, starts with a simple, grim reality check. Your personal hygiene barely exists. You reach for a wooden bowl of cold water, hoping for a wash. But it's grimy and smells faintly of last week's soap or whatever passed for it. You splash it on your face anyway, grimacing at the stinging chill, and realize your fingers are still grimy from yesterday's chores. Stepping outside, the streets greet you with the usual assault. Mud, refuse, and the occasional splash of horse dung from a passing cart. Scholars still argue whether medieval sanitation measures were actually effective, or just slightly delayed the inevitable chaos. But you don't have time to ponder it. You brush past merchants, shouting their wares, the clatter of wooden wheels, and the laughter of children who seem completely immune to the stench and grime. You adjust your wool tunic, itchy against your skin, and silently curse the sumptuary laws that dictated you couldn't wear the soft, luxurious fabrics of the wealthy. Your wardrobe is functional at best and miserable at worst. Passing a fountain, you glimpse your reflection astreaked, tired face framed by unwashed hair. You wonder if anyone notices, or if everyone's too busy surviving to care. A dog scuttles by, scavenging for scraps, and a cat arches its back at a nearby child. The alley twists and turns, revealing glimpses of firelit hearths through open doors. The scent of smoke and cooking mingling with the ever-present rot outside. You take a deep breath, realizing this is just another day in the labyrinthine streets of medieval life. Harsh, chaotic, and oddly vibrant. You wander into the marketplace, where the air vibrates with haggling laughter, and the occasional clatter of a dropped cart. Stalls overflow with produce, cabbages, turnips, and onions piled in teetering towers, while fishmongers flaunt their catch, the smell hitting you like a wall of brine. Your stomach growls, but you know better than to expect a feast. You're limited to what your daily ration allows. Scholars still argue whether these markets truly fed the population efficiently or simply highlighted the wealth gap. But for now, you focus on dodging puddles and slipping past the occasional stray pig rooting through the filth. A woman scolds her child for grabbing a piece of bread, the tiny one trembling under her sharp gaze. You glimpse a nobleman in a silk cloak, his nose wrinkled at the stench around him, and you wonder if he even notices the chaos he rules over. The sumptuary laws dictate his fashion, but luck seems to have granted him immunity from the mud and muck you've been stomping through. You adjust your woolen sleeves, knowing that even small displays of wealth in your attire could earn a public reprimand. At the edge of the square, a barber surgeon pitches his services, offering bloodletting, tooth extraction, and other cures for whatever ails you. The odd detail, some claim these procedures work, while others swear they make things worse. People queue patiently, exchanging gossip and grimaces, while you take a cautious step back, grateful that today you'll avoid both the blade and the basin. Passing under a low wooden arch, you notice the town's curfew bell hanging ominously above, reminding you that darkness and enforced obedience come swiftly. You step into the small chapel at the town's center, where flickering candlelight dances over cold stone walls. The scent of incense mingles with the faint odor of unwashed body, a constant reminder that hygiene here is a communal joke. You sink onto a hard wooden bench, listening to the priest drone on about penance, sin, and divine justice. Oddly enough, you find comfort in the predictability, a rhythm to the day amidst the chaos of mud and curfew. Scholars still argue whether the clergy genuinely aimed for spiritual guidance or merely reinforced social control. But for now, their monotone voice lulls you into a reflective, almost sleepy state. The stained glass windows cast muted colors across the stone floor, crimson, teal, and amber light pooling like spilled liquids. A small child tugs at her mother's sleeve, whispering questions about angels and demons, while the mother shushes her, hands trembling slightly. You glance at the pews, noting the worn carvings etched by generations, tiny symbols of devotion and boredom alike. The oddity: some worshippers leave coins at the altar, hoping for miracles. Yet a clever pickpocket always finds a way to claim them unnoticed. You smirk at the thought, imagining yourself as clever as that thief, if only to survive another week. The bell tower tolls far outside, signaling both the passing hour and the approach of curfew. Shadows stretch across the chapel floor as you rise, shoulders aching, ready to step back into the muddy streets where obedience and survival are measured not in virtue, but in cleverness and caution. You trudge back through the narrow streets, boots squelching in puddles of rainwater mixed with grime and horse dung. The smell is pungent, yet oddly familiar, like a warning that the world outside your hut is alive and chaotic. Street vendors call out, hawking fish, bread, and questionable meats, their voices blending into a noisy chorus that your ears have learned to filter. You dodge a cartwheel, narrowly avoiding a collision with a barrel of pickled herring teetering dangerously. Close to the edge of the vendor's stall, scholars still argue whether this cacophony of commerce created economic opportunity or just amplified the daily struggle to survive. A group of children play nearby, laughing as they splash in muddy puddles, barefoot and oblivious to the filth. You pause, noting the contrast between their carefree energy and your weariness, shoulders heavy with the weight of chores and curfew rules. The oddity: one boy carries a tiny wooden sword, pretending to duel an imaginary dragon while simultaneously keeping watch for watchmen. You can't help but admire the imagination that thrives, even in the harshest conditions. Turning a corner, you notice a cluster of women washing clothes in a public trough, water sloshing over the edges, sending mud and soap suds onto the cobbled streets. Their tunics cling to their bodies, saturated and heavy, yet they chat and laugh, their voices rising above the sloshing and splashing. You wonder if this communal ritual, tedious and messy as it is, brings more solace than the tiny moments of warmth by your own hearth. Night approaches, and torches flicker in doorways, casting dancing shadows on the walls of the buildings. You hug your coat tighter, aware that each step is a negotiation between cautious movement and the chance of tripping over unseen debris. The streets, alive with life, smell, and sound, remind you that in this medieval world, survival is an art one honed through awareness, patience, and perhaps a little luck. You reach the edge of the marketplace just as the sun dips low, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold. The aroma of roasting chestnuts drifts from a vendor's cart, a fleeting comfort amidst the pungent smells of the streets. You notice that each stall is meticulously guarded, the vendor's hands hover near knives or weighing scales, a subtle reminder that in medieval towns, theft is never far from thought. Scholars still argue whether such precautions fostered trust within the community or just a pervasive sense of paranoia. A stray dog scurries past, dragging a half-eaten loaf behind it, eyes darting nervously to anyone who might challenge its spoils. Nearby, a group of peasants haggles over bundles of firewood, the currency exchanged in crude coins, each scratch and dent on the copper pieces telling stories of countless hands. You watch silently, knowing that your own pockets are light, and every coin counts toward survival. The oddity: some merchants have started giving tiny trinkets: a carved wooden bird, a piece of dyed cloth, 2 children who help carry goods, creating a miniature barter system that feels more like magic than economics. As dusk deepens, the lanterns and doorways flicker to life, casting warm pools of light over the cobbled streets. You tread carefully, noting the uneven stones and slick patches where rainwater has mixed with filth, wondering if anyone else notices the poetry in these small dangers. Night brings a different rhythm. Conversations lower, steps become measured, and the city exhales a collective sigh of preparation for curfew. You pause by a fountain, its water murky but lively with leaping fish, and take a quiet moment to breathe, realizing that in this medieval world, even the smallest sources of life are precious. You step into the dimly lit guild hall, the scent of wet timber and waxed floors wrapping around you like a heavy cloak. Artisans are bent over benches, hammering, carving, and shaping goods that will soon adorn homes or churches. The clang of metal on iron rings in your ears, punctuated by occasional shouts as apprentices fumble with tools. Scholars still argue whether guild regulations primarily ensured quality, or simply maintained the hierarchy between masters and journeymen. Your eyes are drawn to a weaver meticulously, threading vibrant indigo and russet through a loom, producing fabric that will later become the finery of nobles. An odd detail catches your attention: a tiny bell tied to the loom's shuttle, jingling each time it passes, as if announcing the birth of each thread. Meanwhile, children of workers chase each other in narrow aisles, laughing despite the constant admonishments to stay clear of sharp instruments. You realize that these spaces are alive, a chaotic blend of creation, discipline, and the daily negotiation between safety and productivity. A sudden draft carries the smell of wet clay from a potter's corner, reminding you of the countless hands that have shaped the town's utensils, tiles, and bricks. Outside, the sun has almost set, leaving only streaks of violet in the sky that seep through high windows. You lean against a post, watching shadows dance across the floor, and reflect on the paradox. In a world that feels rigidly ordered by rules and hierarchy, small bursts of life, creativity, and mischief persist everywhere you look. Every stroke of a brush, every tap of a hammer, even the faint jingling bell, whispers of resilience and continuity in the medieval routine. You wander into the bustling market square, where the cries of vendors mix with the braying of donkeys and the occasional clatter of wooden carts. Piles of produce bright orange pumpkins, russet apples, and pale cabbages compete for attention against stacks of pottery and woven baskets. Scholars still argue whether market regulations were meant to genuinely protect buyers or mostly to reinforce merchant hierarchies. A peculiar sight halts you: a man balancing a tray of live eels on his head, their slippery bodies wriggling as he negotiates through the crowd. Children dodge between shoppers, giggling, and occasionally snatching a loose fruit before their parents notice. You can't help noticing the smell-mingling earth, fish, and horse manure perfume that defines the medieval marketplace. Near the fountain, a street performer juggles small sacks filled with grains, drawing a crowd that laughs and gasps at each precarious toss. Meanwhile, a woman sells herbs and tinctures, her table adorned with bundles of lavender, rosemary, and dried flowers, promising cures for every minor ailment. You try to make sense of the chaos, realizing that even amid rules, schedules, and strict guild oversight, human ingenuity and survival instincts shape the rhythm of daily life. As dusk falls, lanterns flicker to life, casting warm, amber glows on cobblestones slick with rain. You breathe in, noting how this controlled chaos, these minor rebellions of life and work, form the heartbeat of the medieval town a pulse, both fragile and unrelenting. You step cautiously into the dimly lit alley behind the blacksmith's forge. The glow of molten metal painting the walls in fiery hues. Sparks leap and dance as the smith hammers, each strike echoing like a heartbeat in the narrow lane. Scholars still argue whether these workshops were safer than they appear, or if accidents were simply accepted as part of daily life. A ragged boy carries a wooden bucket, tripping over uneven stones, spilling water that sizzles as it hits the hot coals nearby. You notice the pungent mix of sweat, coal dust, and smoke aromas of survival and labor. In one corner, a woman mends torn garments, her needle moving rapidly as she hums a forgotten tune, embodying a quiet defiance against hardship. Nearby, a small group of apprentices debates the proper technique for forging nails, their voices rising in a blend of excitement and frustration. You peek over to see tools lined meticulously on benches, tongs, hammers, chisels, all polished and worn in the service of necessity. Evening approaches, and torches flicker, casting long shadows that stretch like restless spirits across stone walls. The alley feels alive, not just with work, but with stories. Whispered deals, minor quarrels, laughter muffled by thick walls. You realize that life here is a delicate choreography of effort, skill, and the constant negotiation with danger and unpredictability. Each action, each small triumph, resonates with the rhythm of a society balancing tradition, survival, and the faint spark of individuality. You follow the narrow, cobbled streets toward the town square, the smell of baked bread mingling with the sharper scent of manure from the market. Children dart between carts, laughing, their bare feet slapping against stones, polished smooth by generations of traffic. Scholars still argue whether such bustling squares encourage community or simply spread disease faster than anyone could track. At the fountain, a woman washes clothes, her sleeves rolled up, water splashing in rhythmic arcs. Nearby, a butcher displays cuts of meat under the watchful eye of a tax collector, calculating what portion of the day's profit belongs to the Lord. You notice the variety of colors in the crowd: russet tunics, indigo shawls, saffron sashes, teal aprons, a visual map of class and trade, regulated by sumptuary laws. A town crier announces the latest edicts, his voice echoing off stone buildings, drawing the attention of everyone from street sweeps to noble visitors. The cobbled lanes vibrate with the convergence of activity: merchants haggling, children chasing chickens, apprentices running errands. You step carefully, aware that even a minor stumble could result in tripping over baskets or stepping into puddles laced with refuse. At dusk, lanterns are lit, casting a golden glow across timbered facades. The square hums with an almost musical energy, a mix of commerce, survival, and the faint thrill of city life. Each sight, sound, and smell reminds you that in medieval towns, routine is intertwined with risk, and every person carries both the weight of law and the spark of ingenuity. Night falls over the village, and the curfew bell tolls, echoing through the narrow alleys and across the timbered houses. You extinguish your hearth fire, feeling the sudden chill as shadows stretch long and deep. Rats scuttle above your head in the rafters, their tiny claws scratching against the beams, while your neighbors lie in thin straw beds, snoring softly or muttering in dreams. Scholars still argue whether strict curfew laws actually prevented fires or simply enforced obedience among the townsfolk. You creep along the darkened streets, careful to avoid puddles and the stray hooves of returning horses. The smell of smoke from a distant chimney mixes with the earthiness of wet straw, creating a scent that is both comforting and oppressive. In the glow of a half moon, you see silhouettes: a servant carrying water, a night watchman patrolling with lantern and staff, and a lone figure hurriedly returning from a forbidden late errand. Inside the huts, families whisper over small wooden tables, sharing the scant warmth of embers and recounting the day's trials. The quiet is punctuated by the occasional clang of metal or the faint laughter of children who ignore bedtime rules for a fleeting sense of freedom. You lie down on your straw mattress, hearing every creak and groan of the old building, aware that survival in this world is as much about obedience as it is about luck. The night deepens, and you drift into a light, uneasy sleep, dreams filled with the echoes of bells, the distant calls of animals, and the ever-present rules that govern life in the medieval town. Morning light creeps through the cracks in your hut, painting the straw floor with thin golden lines. You wake to the smell of damp earth and last night's ash, your stomach growling at the thought of another meager meal. Today, like every day, begins with chores: fetching water from the well, tending to animals, and preparing simple bread or porridge for your family. The church bell calls for prayers, a reminder that spiritual discipline is as much a part of daily survival as food and fire. Outside, the village is stirring. Peasants shuffle along muddy streets, carrying baskets of vegetables or repairing fences, all under the ever-watchful eyes of the local Lord Steward. Scholars still argue whether the strict medieval rules about clothing, curfew, and diet truly maintained order or simply reinforced social hierarchy. But for you, they are inescapable realities that shape every decision. You glimpse the nobles riding past in horse-drawn carriages, adorned in silks and furs, forbidden to anyone without status. The contrast is stark, a daily reminder of the rigid rules that govern life and survival. Hunger, obedience, and fear blend with small joys. A shared smile, the warmth of a fire, the rare taste of fresh bread. You learn to navigate these rules, sometimes bending them quietly, sometimes obeying strictly, always aware that your choices can mean safety or punishment. By evening, you rest once more, reflecting on the strange world of medieval rules. Every law, every restriction, has a reason rooted in survival, social order. Or Economic 7, if it feels absurd or cruel. As you lie down on your straw bed, the night hums softly around you, and the bell tolls in the distance. A constant reminder that life in medieval Europe was as much about endurance as it was about living.